Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, students, this is our lecture number 6 on postmodern fiction, and today we are going to continue our previous lecture on 100 Years of Solitude. Students, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss uh, take some time, okay, the summary of 100 Years of Solitude, and then a postmodern study of this novel. Students, of all the works by Garcia Marquez, this novel is the most fascinating and most complex. From the very beginning, we recognize the same elements, more elaborate ones, as those of the characters and situations in his shorter fiction. In the words of Mario Vargas Llosa, 100 Years of Solitude extends and magnifies the world erected by his previous books. Students, indeed, the novel is a brilliant amalgamation of elements from all of Garcia Marquez's previous stories, including elements from the fiction of other American novelists, biblical parables, and personal experiences known only to the author. So the basic structure of the novel traces the chronicle of the Buendia family over a century. It is the history of a family with inescapable repetitions, confusions, and progressive decline. Students, beginning sometime in the early 19th century, the novel's time span covers the family's rise and fall from the foundation of Macondo by the youthful patriarch Jose Arcadio Buendia until the death of the last member of the line. Throughout the narrative, the fates of the Buendias and Macondo are parallel reflections, are best understood in terms of their genesis from a single family. 100 Years of Solitude exaggerates events and personal characteristics to such a degree that it is very difficult to define its predominant aim. Sometimes it seems to be satire, at other times it appears to be an evocation of the magical. Perhaps we can be safest in observing that the novel demonstrates that the line between fantasy and reality is very arbitrary. It shows, for instance, that our sense of technical and material progress is relative, and that backwardness, for instance, can be caused as much by social isolation as by historical distance in time. Students, everything depends upon one's cultural reference. A commonplace telescope is a fabulous instrument to either people isolated from modern civilization or at some time or another to all children. "100 Years of Solitude" consists of 20 unnumbered chapters of episodes. The first chapter narrates the genesis of the Buendia clan in the fictional town of Macondo. The story begins in the memory of Colonel Aureliano Buendia, son of Macondo's founder, as he recalls the first time that his father took him to discover ice. The colonial memory evokes an original word, But this moment is overshadowed by the fact that he is facing a firing squad. At once, the omniscient narrator makes us aware that we are in the memory of a character as well as listening to a historical myth. Students, having lived in physical isolation as well as psychological solitude, the people of Macondo learn about progress from the wandering gypsies, one of whom, Milkiajiz, the author, possesses a manuscript in Sanskrit code that contains the history and fate of the Buendia family. This narrative will be the manuscript that is being decoded by the last adult Buendia just before he dies. The novel will constantly shift through time so that memory and linear chronicle time are mixed together in order to give the action a mournful, ghostly tone. Students, the colonel's childhood memory as he faces an execution squad introduces us to the irony of Macondo and an Abolian jungle village that time had once forgotten and that was located at a point that seemed eternally sad. In the beginning, before progress came to Macondo, Jose Arcadio Buendia and his wife Ursula, because they were cousins, lived in fear of producing a child with a pig's tail. We are told that a boy with such a tail had been born to Ursula's aunt and Jose Arcadio Buendia's uncle. This fear is later to be realized in the love affairs between the only remaining Buendias, the bookish Aureliano Babylonia, and his aunt Amaranth Ursula. Incest then becomes the original sin that threatens 6 succeeding generations of Buendias from the fear of having a baby with a pig's tail. The novel's principal theme of solitude is psychological as much as geographical. Their inherited fear gives them an irrational zeal for the fantastic. And students, it cripples their ability for sincere love and honest communication. After her marriage to Jose Arcadio Buendia, Ursula refuses to consummate their union for fear of conceiving a monster. She wears a chastity belt to prevent her husband from having intercourse with her. So one day, however, Jose Arcadio Buendia defeats a poor loser in a cockfight. A person taunts the young Buendia about Ursula's virginity, an insult that is aimed at Arcadio's manhood. Jose Arcadio, in an impetuous rage, kills him. Ursula later sees the dead man's ghost trying to plug the hole in his throat. The man ghost haunts the couple until they are forced to flee their ancestral village. Thus the Buendias set out with some of their friends on a long journey through the jungle. Through exhausting years later, after camping in the wilds one night, Jose Arcadio Buendia has a dream about a city of houses with mirrored walls. He takes this dream as a divine sign and he convinces his followers to build Macondo on the very site. When Jose Arcadio Buendia, his wife Ursula, and some 20 other adventurers settled there, the word is said to be so recent that many things do not have names, and thus it was necessary to point. Jose Arcadio organizes his small settlement into a model community, yet there is already something strange about it. Jose Arcadio had planned the street so as to shade all the homes from the tropical sun. But Macondo remains a burning place where the hinges and door knockers melt with the heat. A peninsula surrounded by water where water was never known to be. When a heat wave occurs in Macondo, men and beasts go mad and birds attack houses. Later, the town is afflicted by a plague of in sleeping sickness, and even later things have to be labeled. Eventually, these labels have to be placed in the context of a thing's function occurring shortly after Rebecca's mysterious arrival. The sleeping sickness or the plague not only causes the loss of memory but prevents sleep. The result is that the townspeople stay up nights amusing one another with nonsensical tales like the one about the capon. Students, postmodernists strike me as people who survived the two world wars with enough experience to give them the ability to write something that relates to that period in time. Shallow as that may be, it still lingers in the back of my head. The greatest element of postmodernism that can be seen in this work of fiction, students, I'm talking about 100 Years of Solitude, would probably be magical realism. The novel chronicles or stories are about a family struggle, a recurring theme with most Latin American literature, and the history of fictional town Macondo. Like most novelists, Gabriel Garcia Marquez crosses genres, combining romance, history, and fantasy. As mentioned earlier, the novel emphasizes magical realism, a post-modernist key element, and even bombards the readers with metaphors and irony. The latter, another key element of the theory. Students, irony is a figure of speech in which the literal meaning of what is said or written is the opposite of what is meant. Students, this didn't start with the postmodernists, since the modernists were also often playful and ironic, but it did become heavily associated with the former theory, central even. So a bigger stress is made with magical realism, the employment of still, sharply defined, smoothly painted images of figures and objects depicted in a surrealistic manner. The themes and subjects in magical realism are often imaginary, somewhat fantastic, with respect to the imagination, with a distinctive dreamlike quality. Students, as noticed with the title, there is a direct emphasis on time. Skillful time shifts are employed in magic realism, in the novel. The ambiguity of time becomes a draw to the readers, even becoming more luring than the plot itself. There are notions that time lapses, repeats, changes, speeds, or stops altogether are different at different parts of the story, and those events, in some sense, happen simultaneously, but there is no clear evidence of how much time the narrative covers exactly. Students Garcia Marquez also points to time as flexible, with which several ideas can cross or point to it all at once. Clearly, you could read it as a linear progression of events, both pertaining to the individual lives presented and history of Macondo itself. However, you can also interpret it to two other distinguished phenomena. Students, one time as a metaphor of history is a circular phenomenon, though the repetition of names and traits belonging to the Buendia family over 6 generations, all the Arcadios possess inquisitive and rational dispositions as well as enormous physical strength. The Aurelianos, meanwhile, tend towards insularity. Students, this inheritance of traits reproduces the history of individual characters and ultimately a history of the town as a succession of the same mistakes and infinitum due to some hubris in our nature. 2. The issue of timelessness or eternity is explored through the framework of mortal existence. A major truth or common patron with which it accomplishes this task is the alchemist's laboratory in the Buendia family home, which was first designed by Milquiades, the author, near the start of the story and remains essentially unchanged throughout its course as a place where the male Buendia characters can indulge their will to solitude, whether through attempts to deconstruct the world with reason, as in the case of Arcadio Buendia, or by the endless creation and destruction of golden fish, like his son Colonel Aureliano Buendia, among a number of other means. A sense of inevitability or of an unstoppable or unchanging event prevails throughout the text, a feeling that regardless of that way one looks at a time, its encompassing nature is the one truthful admission. So students, next time you must read Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid. Okay students, see you.